Dominion Energy had plans to cut down several trees on Sullivan's Island due to the risk of electrocution and fire, but those plans have been halted. I sit down one-on-one with Sullivan's Island Mayor Pat O'Neill for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. And listen to this interview later on iHeartRadio. Mayor Patrick O'Neill, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
I appreciate it greatly. Let me go to some developing news because this is really the talk of Charleston. And this is from LiveFiNews.com. Dominion Energy suspends plan to cut trees on Sullivan's Island. Let me break down a portion of the article. It reads this. After a meeting with Sullivan's Island town officials, Dominion Energy agreed to temporarily halt a plan to cut nearly 250 trees on the island. I know that obviously you met with the representatives of Dominion Energy recently, and you all came to an agreement, and the company will actually halt the tree removals until they can evaluate individual trees and their threat to the power lines. What are they evaluating when it comes to the individual trees right now?
Well, for one thing, these were not just any trees, these were palmetto trees. Dominion had already made their way through the island, cutting lots and lots of trees that had grown up too close to their power lines for their comfort level and for safety, frankly. But they came back this time simply to get palmetto trees. And so they had a list of, I think, 247 palmetto trees growing primarily in the open public right-of-way that they thought were interfering with their wires and that they wanted to, quote, trim. Now, if you're going to trim a palmetto tree, you saw off some of the fronds. What they were doing was sawing off the top of the tree and killing it. So it's not trimming, it's killing. And they had actually already started, and I think got to about 20 palmetto trees before we had our meeting. And I was really grateful to them for agreeing to meet and meeting on very, very short notice.
Sure.
Because I thought this was something of an emergency, because once they cut a tree, it was gone. And these are very slow-growing trees, so it's quite likely that many of the ones they had on the list were 40 or 50 years old or older.
How long does it take for those actual palmetto trees to grow in your mind?
They grow inches a year at the most, just a few inches a year. And in fact, I read something at a Florida native plant website that from the time a seed gets in the ground until you can see a trunk, it could take up to 10 years.
10 years. Mayor, let me ask you, what is the process to decide which trees are to be cut down in your mind?
Well, the power company's been working according to what they say are industry standards that mandate a certain number of feet clearance on the bottom, sides, and top. More on the top, I think, than on the sides and bottom. And these are the standards that they have applied all over Charleston for the cutting that's been taking place in a number of locations: James Island, Mount Pleasant, Isle Palm, Sullivan's Island.
Right.
The problem is that those standards, even though they lead to what a lot of people have considered butchering, nonetheless, they're developed for your average tree, which has branches that go out in all directions.
Sure.
And so in those cases, you need to worry about a tree that'll send a branch out over a power line and possibly fall on it and grow up from the sides up in it. And those can cause problems. That can, in a storm, the branches can fall down or the tree can fall down, knock down the power line. You can have a fire hazard. You can have a hazard to power line workers who are up in there. And what was pointed out to us as we went around with a couple of the Dominion arborists on Sullivan's Island for the first round of cutting is you also need to worry about kids climbing up in trees and being able to reach over to a power line and grounding it and killing themselves, frankly. The problem is those standards, to us at least, don't seem to make much sense when it comes to palmettos, which do not send out branches. They don't grow over things. They don't lean much in a storm.
Right.
They're not going to drop branches in a storm.
Right.
And so one of the arguments that we made to Dominion was that just because something might be within the space that you try to protect around faster growing, multi-limbed trees, it may not be necessary to remove all the palmettos that are in that space or look like they might be there. So they're going to go along with a representative from the town and really try to identify the palmetto trees that are clearly a potential risk. those might be the ones that have their crowns up already in the wires now. That's one thing. But the ones that have their crowns within maybe 5 or 10 feet of the lines, either from below or from the side, that's a different matter, and we'll have a discussion with them about not being too trigger happy with chainsaws.
How do they coordinate with appropriate municipalities, that is, including yours, beforehand?
You say, why don't they?
How do they coordinate with you all, as far as town hall officials, prior to doing this cut?
Well, we got some advance notice that was kind of vague that they would be back cutting more trees. We ultimately got the list of where the palmetto trees were, but it was pretty much after the people who are the homeowners adjacent to those trees had been notified, with very little notice given. So it was a terrible surprise to a lot of people.
And I know from my reports that obviously this is the third tree cutting issue Dominion has faced, if I'm not correct. How many issues have you all been able to face with this in the past, in your mind?
Well, you know, we had other cutting periods back when it was SCE&G.
Right.
The Dominion, of course, bought SCE&G. And they're usually on, I think, a 5-year or 6-year cycle. So the last time would have been with SCE&G. And frankly, it's always the case that when power companies come through and have to clear out trees, limbs that are growing near power lines, the trees look at least somewhat disfigured, at least for a while until they start to grow back. So it's always been an issue. But I've never seen an issue like this where they were going after palmetto trees specifically, knowing full well that the only thing you can do if you have to get it out of that space and you're using a chainsaw to do it is kill the tree. So we now have some 20-foot high stumps until such time as they remove the rest of the tree.
And how many stumps are we talking right now?
Well, so far they've cut, I think, maybe 20 trees before the ceasefire.
Right.
And so we hope that of the remaining 220 some odd, that we, working with them, will be able to rationally cut that number way down as far as the trees that pose a near-term risk. What we also agreed with Dominion was that once those near-term risk trees are identified, that we would then look at them, try to identify those that could be transplanted. Because, you know, palmetto trees transplant pretty well.
Sure.
You see them all over town. You see them on the backs of trucks.
Right.
You just have that small, compact root ball. So in some cases, we hope it'll be possible to remove the trees intact with the root ball and the crown intact, and then transplant them somewhere else.
Somewhere else.
Yet to be determined.
Okay.
And yet to be determined is who pays.
Who will pay for this?
That's yet to be determined. We have to figure that out. I've already heard from several residents saying, "I'd be happy to take a couple if if you want to put them in my yard."
Right.
I haven't had anybody yet say, "I'll write you a check for them." And Dominion was sort of circumspect about that when we spoke. So there's a lot of stuff to be worked out. But it's so important that we do it and protect as many of those trees on Sullivan's Island as possible. If you're going to protect palmetto trees anywhere, that's where it should be. Because remember, the palmetto tree is a state tree.
Yes.
The palmetto tree is on our state flag. That's the most prominent part of it.
Sure.
And it's an iconic symbol of the state of South Carolina. And that's because in the run-up to the Revolutionary War, at the Battle of Sullivan's Island, when the Americans were able to defeat a number of ships in the British fleet that were coming into Charleston Harbor to try to take Charleston, they started firing on the British fleet. The Americans were in the process of constructing a fort made of palmetto logs that were stacked up.
Right.
And even though it wasn't complete, it provided them enough shelter that they could continue firing on the British ships, sink a few, and run the others off. And that's because the palmetto trunk is rather spongy, and so it doesn't explode into splinters like most hardwood trees would do.
Right.
So that's the point at which which inspired later South Carolina leaders to add the outline of the palmetto tree to the blue field with the crescent.
You talk about obviously the palmetto flag being our state flag. Where are the leaders from the state of South Carolina on this issue?
Well, we didn't have a chance to call Columbia on this, but I think it's important that we do that. And actually, I did hear from our Senator Chip Campson, who is very concerned about it, and we're keeping him posted.
Sure. And let me get to the other side, because this is a statement from Dominion Energy to Channel 5 recently, quote, "Following our routine 5-year trimming cycle on Sullivan's Island, our foresters identified a number of trees for removal due to their proximity to overhead power lines." How many power lines are we talking on Sullivan's Island that may be in the way with these palmetto trees?
Well, almost all of the power that supplies the island is above ground. On both ends of the island, there are several blocks where there's underground power.
Okay.
But the rest of the island is overhead. And we are looking at the possibility of getting some engineering studies done so that we'd have some general idea of what it would cost to go underground with at least some of our wires on the island. But otherwise, every street pretty much has overhead power lines.
Right.
And we want our power, obviously.
Right, obviously. You talk about that engineering study. How long will that take?
I don't know yet, but it costs money. It costs a bunch of money to get that done, to find out how much money the actual work would cost. And there's a fund that is related to Dominion that comes out of the franchise fee, a small amount of money that municipalities can access. It has to be on a matching basis, so we got to put up $1 for every dollar that comes out of that fund, which is paid by the customers, I might add.
Right.
The first dollar is paid by the customers. The next dollar would be the towns.
And how soon will you match those dollars?
Well, again, we've got to look at some idea of what it would cost to do that general study.
And they also go on to say this: trees within close proximity to energized lines are both a fire hazard and an issue of public safety. As you and I have discussed before, trees and tree limbs, that is, continue to be the #1 reason for power outages across our system, and the safety and reliability of our state is our primary concern. How many power outages have Sullivan's Island been able to have despite, these palmetto trees in existence?
Well, I pointed that out to them, that, we made it through Hurricane Dorian last fall very well. And I had to say to Dominion, everybody fussed about your cutting, but I don't think the power went out very long. And actually, when it did go out, it was because of a substation off the island. So we kept power all the way through, but I pointed out we kept that power on in spite of the fact that all of these palmetto trees were right where they are right now. So it's not like the palmetto trees sprouted up since the hurricane. They were all within where they are now. And we were able to keep power going.
And they also say this, quote, "The removal process back then began that week. Trees that exceed that is a maximum height of approximately 15 feet are not suitable for planting along right-of-ways or near overhead power lines." For listeners, and obviously they have lists of where the trimming is going to happen. But let me reread that. "Trees that exceed a maximum height of approximately 15 feet are not suitable for planting along right-of-ways or near overhead power lines." You talked about the overhead power lines. What are the right-of-ways on Sullivan's Island?
Well, the right-of-ways basically refer to the shoulder of a road, basically, and some additional space as well. It's from the individual's property line. It's from there to the street, essentially. And the street is part of the right-of-way. So you might have a street that's 20 feet, where you have 20 feet of asphalt. It's 20 feet wide, but 10 feet of shoulder or more on either side. And a lot of times people wind up planting their own vegetation in those rights of way. It creates problems for parking, if that's a place where parking is allowed, and people are planting bushes there, then a car can't park there. And, we'd like to make sure we have something approaching adequate parking. So, it doesn't make sense. I would not tell anybody, take a 15-foot palmetto tree and plant it under your electric wire or your power line. That doesn't make any sense at all. So people do need to exercise some foresight when they're locating trees of any kind. But the other thing is I have to check with some people that know more about trees and botany than I do. To find out, but I have a suspicion that a lot of these palmetto trees were planted in the right-of-way under the power lines many, many years ago by birds who eat the palmetto berries and then perch on the wire, and then nature takes its course, and then you wind up with seeds on the ground under the wire.
That's right.
But that's just my theory. I don't have any expertise.
Oh, no worries at all. And you talked earlier, obviously, about the SCNG, and obviously the Dominion Energy bought them out. when they had that 5-year cycle with SNG, how many palmetto trees were they able to cut down?
I don't remember them taking out palmetto trees. Certainly not to this number. Whether they might have removed one or two here and there, I can't say.
See, and how did they go about that process as far as SNG coming and taking down those trees at that time?
The same way Dominion did. They came in and cut. And I was happy to see the amount of pushback from our residents on this. Not because I like to see power companies having problems, but because it shows that our residents are paying attention to the environment. They're paying attention to the trees on the island that are very important to them.
Sure. And I know earlier you talked about how the next time the Dominion Energy shows up and obviously wants to cut down some of those trees, that you'll send a representative from the town there. What exactly will you all look for then?
Well, I think we'll look for them to identify the ones that they think are high risk, and then hopefully we'll be able to have a discussion with them. Fact of the matter is they've got the upper hand because the State Public Service Commission is who they answer to and not us. But they also, of course, have to pay attention somewhat to public opinion. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to have a discussion, and hopefully the trees that they identify as definitely high risk, it will be apparent to us, and it'll be defensible to any neighbor that wants to look at it at the time, where we can say, look at that palmetto tree, the fronds are all up in the midst of those wires as it is now, so it can't stay there. But then it's going to be a matter of which ones can we transplant.
Okay.
And if they're up touching the wires, then what we're told by the power company is they got to cut the power right there so they can get the tree out of there.
Sure.
Because you don't want to be the guy operating the machinery if the top of the tree is touching the power line.
And I want to ask this too. During this whole process that Dominion Energy has done, as far as cutting some of those trees down, how much is that costing the town?
Not a whole lot of money. We don't pay for cutting the trees.
Okay.
Now it's going to start costing us in staff time or an outside arborist time that we have to pay for to accompany Dominion with them when doing this assessment of all the trees. But I think that would be money well spent if it saves our palmettos.
Palmettos. And obviously, Dominion Energy is with the Public Service Commission of the state. But if you were to, could you go and get an outside arborist to do it independently?
Not to do the cutting, but
okay.
I don't think we could do that.
Okay.
I'm not sure we should do that, frankly. But we have, we've retained an arborist to survey some of the trees that they were looking at the first pass when they were taking out the other trees.
And what did that person see?
Well, it varied depending on the location.
Okay.
And depending on the location.
Okay.
Now, one place, the town administrator and I and a council member, Backman Smith, and our town arborist took them was to see the gold bug tree.
Oh, yes.
Which is so historic and so important on the island. And we wanted to make sure they knew that and that they would show some respect. And it turns out the tree was not posing much of a threat to them and vice versa.
Vice versa. Is this political, Mayor?
Not really. I've had people that argue about trees on the other side of that issue if it comes to the accreted land or whatever, who are hopping mad about losing the trees from the public realm.
Right. Mayor Patrick O'Neill, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Folks.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Come over and see us.
I certainly will.